We're very glad that you can join us for the fourth session. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's presentation as much as you enjoyed last week's. Your questions and comments last week were very thought-provoking and really fantastic. They added so much to our discussion. This is going to be the fourth in the series of 8 presentations that will end at the end of June or the early July, and we're trying to be respectful of everyone's time. We're beginning each session at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time here in the US, and each of these eight presentations builds on the ones that have come before. We're asking that everybody mute themselves so that there are no distractions during the presentation. If you have questions as we go along, please put them into the chat and we will address your questions before we finish. You can enter your questions by using the chat function on your screen's bottom toolbar. I can moderate these questions to ensure that we address all of your points. There will be a pause in the middle of the presentation where we will invite your comments up to that point and questions, as well as having a discussion at the end of the presentation. When you want to participate in the discussion, we're just asking you to raise your electronic hand from the reactions button on the bottom toolbar, and we will call on you to unmute yourself and speak. We want to minimize interruptions and ensure that everyone has a chance to hear what you would like to contribute. So without further ado, James, do you have any introductory remarks before we start the presentation? You're on mute, James.
I do not.
Okay, then let's begin.
Welcome to Session 4, Harmonious Design of Regional Communities. In the last session, we discussed how distributive value, the value of cooperating to ensure the human needs are met, can resolve the differences between individual and collective wealth in society. In our current system, human development in the fields of art, science, education, technology, and ecology is heavily influenced by business and government. Because of this reliance on governments and businesses, human society and culture are deprived of psychological and social depth. For most people, it's all about how much money you have, what kind of car you bought, where you live, or what your work is. Is that really culture? No, that's about economic value and the governmental influence on your position of wealth in society. Is that psychological depth? No. Is it deep in terms of the meaning for society? No. So, psychological and social depth are lacking because they've been displaced by the influences of economics or politics in our lives. We spend more attention on politics and personal economic advancement than we do on enriching our culture by creating deeper meaning in our lives, not only psychologically, but socially. This is why the real fabric of society can only be found in our cultural life. Its vibrancy and cohesion exists beyond the political and economic realms. Society can't achieve a healthy economic life unless people cooperate with intentionality. And by that, we mean that we want to work together. We're happy to work together, and we're all on the same page. And that's different from just cooperating where a group of people come together to work on a project. It doesn't mean they want to work together. They're just there to finish the job. Human collaboration nourishes our everyday material existence and generates cultural engagement. Culture is the beating heart of society, but it cannot serve this role unless it's allowed to flourish. Human culture requires an independent and prominent place in society apart from the established measures of use value and exchange value. Through culture, we strive to fully actualize our personal skills through our interdependence. We need our collective skills to work together. By doing that, we're creating value beyond what any of us could do alone. This stimulates and enables our unique and knowledgeable contributions to economic life. So here's an example. Let's say a community has decided that they need to make a local park more inviting, so they get together to clean it up and plant some trees. Not only are they performing the task at hand, but they're also building relationships and getting to know each other. They're having fun, working together to create value for the common good. Together, the community is exchanging a deeper sense of value that you can't really measure. But unfortunately, in today's society, one of the few times we ever come together like that in solidarity is when there's an emergency. Culture changes the way we see and live in the world. It places the focus of economics on the material needs of a community. This is often organized as a cooperative association and the cultural institutions which support this collaboration. We may not be familiar with cooperatives, but they have always existed and still do. In 2017, the University of Wisconsin-Madison identified more than 64,000 cooperative businesses in the U.S. across 4 sectors: commercial sales, marketing and production, financial services, social and public services, and utilities. And there are thousands more cooperatives in the housing sector. Cooperatives like these vitalize our individual economic experience through voluntary action. Working together, sharing experiences, and building trust creates a powerful cultural resonance, leading to a more harmonious society. This is why cooperation is different from socialism. Socialism views the state as the key economic actor instead of the individual person and the community. If the government becomes too intrusive, people can get too dependent on social benefits. Socialism has some good properties, but is still a state-centralized process. Cooperation means decentralization at the community level, where power comes down to the individual and the community. As in capitalism, socialism focuses on economic supply and demand for resources, rather than the principle of social cooperation to meet human needs. What does this mean exactly? How can social cooperation meet human needs?
I'm going to ask now if anybody has any questions or responses to these questions so that we can have a discussion about this. Please raise your electronic hand, because I can't see everybody. Dale, you have a comment.
Yeah, in the beginning of the slides, you talked about meaning and the development of deeper meaning, a sense of deeper meaning. I was wondering what you meant by that. What does that really refer to when you say looking for deeper meaning? What does it mean?
What does deeper meaning mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. If I can hazard a guess, I think deeper meaning means a more fulfilling and sustainable or sustaining interaction, in a sense, with me personally, rather than simply a financial transaction or a political transaction where I compromise to get something done. Does that make sense? I don't know if anyone else has comments about this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that answer. I was wondering, in a sense of, how might one measure that and assess whether or not someone's living a life from a deeper sense of meaning or not. Because you're basically saying that that's a value as counteracted to the value of just accumulation of money and things. So how would you measure that or point to that or, tell that you're improving in that area?
That's a very good question. Any comments from anybody else? I mean, I have a lot of stuff, but I'm not sure that it's relevant. Sushen, let's start with you and then we'll go to James.
Well, I was going to comment, the deeper meaning is a sense of well-being. And then that can be indirectly measured through your health, your state of health, your mental health. You're feeling everything's okay. And then that your basic needs are met, so you have a pretty satisfying life. And so health often do register. If you're under stress, you have different physical symptoms or emotional concerns or depressions, anxiety, bipolar, several different aspects of the health can be indication of, if your needs are really met or not.
Mhm.
Good point. James, I saw you raise your physical hand.
Yes, that's because my virtual hand is covered up and I don't have access to it. I think Sushan's point is very good. That's about covers individual health, but society also has its own form of health. And we'll be covering social health later in the seminar in the next few weeks in terms of measuring it empirically.
Okay.
If that's what Dale was driving at.
Dale, does that sort of answer your question? I'm going to go to Brad in a minute, but if you have a short.
Yeah, no, I was looking at it as a value. If you value the dimension of meaning, then how do you measure it? And certainly one's health is a meaningful indicator of that. One of probably several. I think there's probably more.
Okay.
Yeah, and what I was saying is that you can actually measure social health as well.
Yes.
And we'll be discussing that later.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to Brad. What would you say to this?
Yeah. What I have to say is kind of similar or building on what James was alluding to, more in pointing, that we're going to get to it later. But a lot of there's some studies of motivation, and one of the kind of findings pretty commonly is that what really motivates people is something bigger than themselves. So that would be one potential meaning of deeper meaning, is something greater than yourself. And it's interesting, maybe this is just a tangent. I'm really good at tangents, but I'm reading a book right now that distinguishes between myth and mythology and psychology. It happens to be saying that women tend to be more oriented toward the interior and psychological dimension, and men tend to be more oriented toward the mythological or archetypes and big, outer things. And, we could maybe see, and these are just tendencies. And it's interesting that, the women's comments seem to fit that. And, I happen to be bringing up the more outer picture stuff. So maybe there's something to that book I'm reading. Check.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Roz, gentle.
Just to add to what everyone is saying, for me, meaning is also very much connected to purpose. When there is some sort of, you get up in the morning and you go, I know why I'm here. I've got something to do. I have something to give. This purpose really is all about giving back in some form or other. So that's just another connection I'll throw in there.
Very good point. Dale, did you have another point, or should you just lower your hand?
Oh, sorry, I think I'll lower my hand.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for the discussion.
Alberta has a point that she would like to make.
I'm actually intrigued by this question. How can social cooperation meet human needs? And I think that the presentation has made it obvious that cooperation is a verb. It's something that people do. And as people are working together, the human needs actually begin to arise, and then we can base our society on human needs, as opposed to the behavior of what they buy and sell as the marker for what the needs are. And I think that's I think that would be really refreshing, to live in a society in which the social cooperation created the market, created the market. Check.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Carmel.
Yeah, well, what with in relation to that social cooperation, like I just think of the like the food swaps, the the community share things. When people have got too much of something, there's different groups that most areas have got them, where they people post, does anyone want some free lemons? Does anyone want some free whatever? And that builds social cohesion. Like people feel really connected. And people feel, or if they really need something, has anyone got blah, blah, blah. And it kind of, and even the food swaps I've been to, they say you don't even need to have anything, just come and take something home, because not everyone's got a garden. And so that just builds, that builds so much social cohesion and well-being and feeling connected, and you're not alone. And you're not going to the shops to buy it, you're subliminally grown it, or they've already got it, they don't want it anymore. So
Thanks very much. James, and then we'll get to Sushen.
Yeah, I would add to that, Carmel, that it also builds trust in a community. And that's something that's lacking a lot of times in socialism, because there's so much dependency on the state that community trust can go lacking, and therefore there's a lack of solidarity in some socialist societies, because there's a lot of cynicism about heavy centralized state control.
Okay. Sushen.
Yeah, I just want to add on to the question of how does social cooperation meet human needs. And then one aspect, of course, when you do have social interaction, you are having that relationship with somebody else, especially for somebody like me who lives by myself now. And then to have the cooperative aspect, that is much more open to meeting common needs. So then it's much more have a chance to practice our rightful relationship with each other, and then how to really listen to each other, that we can have maybe different solution, but yet when our common needs are met, then there is a sense of goodwill. So that in that sense also is, contribute to the greater health of myself individually and for the whole group.
Thank you. Eva.
This conversation is convincing me. I've suspected a lot along, but it's convincing me that trust is a human need, not just the physical stuff that we've been thinking about during this seminar.
You mean interpersonal trust?
Yeah.
Okay. Christine Jennison, how about you?
I just wanted to add in developing history, all those things that people have said, and we develop history. It's not just a one-time thing. It's a relationship building. It's happening with all those interactions that we've been talking about that meet needs. I just wanted to put that in there.
Thank you very much. Any other comments before we proceed? Did you have something else, Christine? Okay, James, I think we can probably continue.
Neither use value nor exchange value express the value of resources that are distributed through the kind of cooperation that we see in nature. In the natural habitat, the need expressed in an ecosystem is directly met through that system. The ecosystem does not depend on someone to allocate resources to it. Use value and exchange value can only be transformed through the direct action of a community sharing its common resources. Through this kind of cooperation, many things fall into place. Self-expression, individual evolution, knowledge creation, and spiritual understanding. These are wealth-creating capacities, but they can only arise when culture enables them to form a symbiotic relationship with the earth. Across our long collective history, indigenous cultures have honored their natural and social commons. Native languages, customs, and habits exist with a different sense of time. They don't have that same sense of urgency that our society currently has, and this is a uniquely civilizing moment for those native communities. Their rituals and celebrations are more about building a legacy of sustainability for future generations based on what happened in the past, and this is expressed in their culture through music and dance or a distinct appreciation of local plants and animals. For example, in northern Canada, Indigenous people have 50 different words for snow, which indicates how different their culture is from ours. We begin to understand how other cultures are more connected to universal values and a greater planetary view of life. This is how a place-based relationship with the earth informs the integrity of our cultures. It also informs the meaning of our existence and the recognition that all creatures on earth are interrelated. The beliefs and worldviews that are held in common by a people or an ethnic group instruct them to unite as a cultural community. It also teaches them to use their resources wisely. This power does not come from the economy or the political state, which builds social institutions that often increase the self-interest, competition, and oppression that most humans seek to avoid. Personal empowerment lies in the mutuality, generosity, and joy of working together. We transcend our differences through respect, tolerance, and care for others as individuals who participate in activities that serve our common interests. In this way, culture can play a decisive role in transforming the spiteful competition and violent conflicts that are generated through use value and exchange value in today's economy. Knowing that we're connected with Earth and with those around us, we can reimagine public governance emerging from the place where people live, not through the blind forces of business or government. Culture provides the fertile ground for the values of freedom, equality, and cooperation to integrate our communities with our environment. As cultural unity blossoms through this conscious relationship between society and nature, it will inspire the fields of education and technology to create new ways of maintaining social complexity, decentralizing our political choices, and assuring economic sustainability. Only a new kind of culture can recreate our decaying institutions into the vibrant civilization that must emerge in the future. Next week, we'll take a look at managing complexity.
Any particular comments about the rest of this presentation? Dee,
Thank you, Terry. I have to tell you, I so appreciate what EDA is doing here to teach us more. I so appreciate it because you're talking in language that I can understand. It's not above my head. I might have to delve into it and study it, but back in the day when I was working in pharmacy, we did things for people, but it was a different feeling. It was more of a like rushed, we're doing what we have to do and that. And here in our area, I had a nonprofit called Namaste, and we would do Earth Day, we would do, seminars and all that other stuff. And Earth Day, when I led it, I don't think I mean, at the time I thought I was doing a great job, but after being and listening to what EDA has to offer, if I do another Earth Day thing, I have to go 10 layers down, and talking about a different way of sustainability. So I just want to thank you for this because it's really opening my eyes, and I'm retired now, so I have more of a time to really delve into it instead of doing this while I'm working. But thank you so much.
thank you, Dee. James, can I ask you to go back to slide 24 for
Sure.
I just had a question myself and it sort of escaped me as we went on in the presentation. I want to sort of try to recapture it.
Slide 24.
Yeah, 24, I think. Yeah. Okay. So just go on from there for just a second.
For example, in northern Canada, Indigenous people have 50 different words for snow, which indicates how different their culture is from ours. We begin to understand how other cultures are more connected to universal values and a greater planetary view of life. This is how a place-based relationship with the Earth informs the integrity of our cultures. It also
Okay.
informs the meaning of our
Thank you.
existence and the recognition that all creatures on Earth.
The question I had is,
Sorry, hang on.
no, that was perfect. The question that I had was, one of the things that sets the United States apart from other countries in the world is our, not so much our political experiment, but our cultural experiment. And if you look at the history of the old world, all sorts of cultures are place-based. Ethnic groups and had territories. And when you come to the United States, they don't. And when you come to places like Australia, they don't have a deep history of place-based culture. So what I'm wondering is how we can grow within a place-based culture without sort of having it be, this is my territory, that's your territory, never the twain shall meet, we'll fight over the edges. So I want to just throw that out there for anyone else, because I see a lot of this place-based culture as being sort of the old European or the old world model, where people are constantly fighting. And that's not what I want for the future. So I sort of want to get a handle on how that would operate in this new system. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, so the European tradition did devolve into conflict-based disagreements between first, communities and then states. There's a framework called core and periphery. So a core
Yeah.
urban center would accumulate wealth and use the periphery to support it, and it created a inequality between the two regions. But the place-based economies and cultures of the past in history were rather different, as exemplified in the point about the indigenous cultures. And the way a lot of people are seeing it now is that we can have that kind of place-based culture if we want it, because our ecologies now are basically telling us that only the people in the regions of an ecosystem are going to take care of the ecosystem themselves, because governments and businesses are not going to do it. And that's becoming clear. It's also become clear that the Earth has exceeded its carrying capacity. So we are actually using more resources than will meet the needs of the population in each of those regions. So we're calling those bioregions. And the idea is to live in a place-based economy in the future would be to build out our control and self-governance over these bioregions. And that it would be a way of recapturing some of the ancient principles that had been lost over a period of time when governments took over and then businesses took over.
Yeah, I do understand that. I'm just wanting to understand how we prevent the place-based from becoming sort of the castle within which we live and not allowing external influences. That was always the question. But Jacqueline, you might have some comments on that.
Just some thoughts. That's one of the reasons why I think EDA has chosen to focus on the bioregion, on the local, is because if anyone's been aware of or paying attention to how laws are passed, for example, or how changes are made on a political level, it tends to start with the local. I mean, it's where we can make a difference. Now, like you, Terry, I've lived in many different parts of the world. And so my mental framework has always been global. And it's been a real challenge for me to, sort of periscope in, and look at the local and really keep that as my framework. So there's that. And the other end of that is really, this sort of growing awareness all over the world, I think, that we can focus on where we live individually. It's our personal sort of place, but there is no division, really, other than artificial political divisions. That, we live in a global environment. Climate change is the most obvious example of that, while we're focusing for legislative change on the local, we have to be aware of the fact that, we're global citizens, literally, not just figuratively. And so, it's not just our own well-being that we have to look out for. We have to really look out for the global well-being as well, which is extraordinarily challenging, of course. I wrote a note down here, building a legacy of sustainability for future generations, when we were on this slide about indigenous cultures. And that's what totally boggles my mind, is how little that is in people's consciousnesses, politicians in particular, that, you know, they're passing laws to take care of their own well-being today or next month or 6 months down the road, you know, to make sure they're going to be taken care of. What about the sustainability for future generations? So it's something I think, you know, we all have to find a way to do, you know, just in our own personal lives and in our worldviews, is to balance that local with the global, because, you know, they're not separable anymore, as I can see it.
No, I agree with that. I just want to maintain the more global, in a sense, while we're focusing on the local, because I don't want it to be a paranoid us against them situation. James.
Yeah, the way I've begun to see this is that the paradigm of sovereign nation states, which is only about 3 centuries old, where nations are agree to exist side by side by allowing each other to exist with the promise that each one won't invade the other, or each one won't involve themselves in the internal operations of the adjoining states. And it's been a fairly tenuous framework for a long time. And a lot of people believe that we've come to a point right now where nation states are going to have to devolve some of their power down to local communities and regional communities. So this is where, Terry, I don't think it's going to become some kind of castle of agrarian communities where you have bioregions and there's no corporations or no states or nation states, that is. I think it's going to be more that businesses will become smaller, as in cooperatives, and the states will share a lot of power to manage the resources at the local levels, because in fact, the people at the local levels are the ones who live alongside those resources and know more than the businesses and the nation states about how to manage and share those resources.
Okay. I appreciate that. Brad.
Yeah, this is a kind of the general question of that you bring up, Terry, of the tendency of human beings, us, when we're identified with a place, a culture, a way of life, to make the folks on the other side of the hill the other and the enemy. You know, this is pretty deep in our history. You know, even the indigenous people who we, you know, laud as being more, you know, in touch with their environment than we are, you know, tended to fight the people and trade with them. But so this is something that's deep. I've given a lot of thought, a lot of kind of research and study to this. And I think it's just, we need to recognize this is not a full answer. And I do have a kind of a pointer to an answer, but I think we do need to recognize that kind of instinctually we are cooperative. We tend to be cooperative with those who we identify as our own tribe, so to speak, and we tend to others, and that's kind of an instinctual thing in us. I see it in myself. You know, people who support certain political politicians that to me are abhorrent, you know, I tend to other them, you know, inside myself. I see that, you know, and and to conclude my pointer, it would be kind of back to my first comment, you know, a new myth or a different myth. And one of the things I read in this book is that we can't just, a person can't create a new myth. but maybe there's some archetypal myths out there, or an archetypal myth out there that would be more uniting of us as human, as human beings of one tribe. And I haven't gotten farther than that yet. Just some explorations, because it's a tough question to me.
It's a tough
You
question.
posed, Terry.
What book is it that you're referring to so that the rest of us can maybe look at it?
Oh, it's a book I stumbled on called Men, Myths, Men, Power, and Myths, and it was published in the 90s by a Swiss psychologist, Jungian, you might guess, with myths in the title. So I'm only a quarter of the way into it, so
Interesting.
I can't necessarily
No, I mean,
recommend it yet.
It's interesting. It's interesting. I appreciate the reference. As an avid reader and historian, I really get it.
Yeah.
Any other questions that people have about this presentation and how we can create a culture that supports freedom and equality and cooperation in our society? I'll give you a minute to think about that. It's a tough thing. Jacqueline, and then we'll go to Sushen.
For me, it's just staying conscious, and that's not always easy because, like Brad, I can easily slip into that othering consciousness, and just to check myself constantly, really literally every day, and see how I'm reacting to the news, how I'm living my life, the choices I make. Not to obsess about it, because that would drive me crazy. But that's a responsibility I think I have as a human being on the planet.
Okay, Sushen, and then Ed.
Yeah, I do agree with Jacqueline's answer, but my point I was going to raise is that I think one of the reasons why sometimes we feel that there's only limited resources, and so that we sometimes have the tendency saying that, if I don't take what I need now, there might not be enough. Other people, you kind of have to fight for it. If our perception or my perception is such, or my neighbor's perception is such that there's only limited resources, we have to fight for it. So I'm just bringing some potential problem why sometimes we cannot easily overcome, the lack of enough resources, when in reality, if we manage and distribute accordingly, which we are learning in this course, there will be enough in other paradigm to follow.
Thank you very much. Ed, and then Carmel.
I find it really interesting that they're just kind of looking at the discussion of the way the United States is and the European countries. They're so, I was thinking about traveling and how it's really popular to say, okay, I really want to visit France or Poland or some other country because of the culture and the society and the food and the different kinds of, basically their own thing that is separate and special. And I wonder about what happens to the United States. Maybe if you look, I'm just looking at a map and looking at the United States compared to Europe, it's like, we're massive. Is it really possible to create a society from coast to coast that is one cohesive thing? that has one cohesive social consciousness. Maybe we're going to be quartered up, northeast, southwest, south, whatever. And then those units would have to figure out what to do with their resources, what to do with their people, what to do with their politics. Maybe it's not something we want to consider, but I'm really concerned about the whole survivability of this country.
Let me just make one comment before I go to Carmel and then Anthony and Roz. In my estimation, the grand experiment that the American republics writ large, Canada, United States, Western Hemisphere, have engaged in is whether or not a variety of cultures can exist in the same region without, as I had said before, sort of castling that region and making it, this is ours, that is yours, don't interfere. This is our culture. Because to my mind, European and Middle Eastern and African cultures have had territory is intrinsically linked to ethnicity, culture, religion, et cetera, et cetera. And that the sort of grand experiment of the United States and of places like Australia has been, how do we get all of these different ethnic and cultural groups to cooperate when they don't have territory to defend? So, Carmel, your comment is next. I'm sorry, that was just my interjection.
Interesting thing is that I'll talk what I was going to. So with social cohesion, so what, and our idea for that is what you're never going to get cohesion when some people are going hungry and food is getting thrown out. That's a waste of resources. And people's needs aren't getting met. So there's more and more organisations. They're probably co-ops. They're probably that are collecting. It's all volunteer stuff, collecting what restaurants, supermarkets, anyone throws out, and then they go and make up meals. And so that's a step towards social cohesion when the waste is getting reduced and more and more people are getting good nutritious food that they can get delivered or go and pick up. So that was one thing. But the other thing that was just on the news today, that with solar panels and trying to collect that a big group that's excluded from being able to do that are renters, and they're now they're talking about how they actually going to start making it almost that you have to, that if you've got a rental property, how can a renter shouldn't be excluded from being able to have solar to cover their electricity costs. So again, there's all these different things that, when some group are getting all their needs met from solar panel and good nutritious meals and all that, and then there's another group that have high electricity bills and hardly any money for food. And, there's not going to be cohesion with that. So I just think that more and more steps that actually level the playing field a bit, and so that people have their right of a good meal each day. And, with interest rates going up, there's a huge pressure on that with interest rates, and there's not enough money in people's pockets to live. So,
Good point.
But that's interesting what you said, Terry, that groups, that are not defending their land, but what causes them to, cooperate. I don't have the answer to that, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Anthony, what say you?
I want to look at two factors, trust and self-sufficiency. I think trust, which was mentioned early, is a kind of key ingredient that is what it really takes to cooperate. And I think, you start with a family where you have the most trust, expand to the neighborhood where you have less trust, but more possibility of self-sufficiency with, the greater numbers, then to the community, and then to the bioregion, perhaps. That's where I think you have enough self-sufficiency, to be biologically relatively self-sufficient because the ecosystem is. I think, Terry, your metaphor for a castle, I mean, there's the good and the bad side of that. The good side is see to your own castle and become as economically self-sufficient as you can as a group, so that you're not subject to these global economic forces that are kind of inherently unstable and lead to wars over oil and things like that, when there's not self-sufficiency. I guess I've said enough.
Thank you, Anthony. Very, very good points. Roz.
Just to add to what everyone's saying, I was with a group for many years, and we did a project in 1986 called Global Cooperation for a Better World, and it involved people from all over the world. And I think the one thing that makes something happen in terms of cooperation is sharing the same mission. And that, again, it comes back to purpose and meaning and all those things. And if we could capture what is that shared mission that we could all get on board, I don't know, it may be there. But just in terms of Australia and America and the territories, I still find that both in Australia and here, there are always those territories within the country. And I think that's what we're seeing. Those territories are getting more and more defined, not just culturally, but politically in every other way. But culturally, certainly, even in Los Angeles, where I am, there's Koreatown, there's Chinatown, there's every town. So, you've got the cultures all sort of coming together because there is a commonality that binds them. And I guess we have to find what is the commonality that binds us all to bring us all together to cooperate. I don't know the answer to that.
I agree with your points. Very cogent. James, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the notion that there's still going to be competition between, let's say, an urban center and a rural area. And we're experiencing that very much in the United States with blue states and red states and that sort of thing. But it goes back to a more fundamental point, which is that the reason why this seminar started out with use value and exchange value is to demonstrate how those two principles grew up alongside of each other and yet created competition with each other. And it's that competition that led to the duality that creates the sense of an in-group and an out-group. And that's when you have the problem of, my group is striving to be self-sufficient. We don't care about what you guys are doing. In fact, what we want to do is accumulate wealth in our area, and we don't care if we deprive you of wealth in your area. And in a lot of cases, that's exactly what's happened. The urban centers have been the centers of wealth accumulation, and the rural areas have been the subject of lower wages and also oppressive labor tactics that help to support the core centers. And it's happened that way all over the world. So the question is, we could say, historically speaking, there's never a resolution of that. It'll always be that way. But the fact is that if we recognize that the paradox of the use value and exchange value kind of economies can be overcome, then we'd be on the road to greater cooperation and improvement of our culture and leading to self-sufficiency. But as long as we don't have the right mooring in terms of how the economic system is set up, and if we are not taught that, then we'll never find our way into that self-sufficient kind of cooperation that we're striving for.
Good points. Anthony, did you have something else? I'm sorry, you're muted, Anthony.
No, I don't know if I forgot to lower my hand or what. I'm sorry. I'll lower it now.
That's okay. I just didn't want to miss you. Anybody else have any comments before we wrap this up? We're almost at time, but we can entertain another comment. If not, I will invite you to tune in next week for session 5, and we will continue with this discussion. We have had a comment to have people sort of introduce themselves and share what they would like to share about their background and why they're interested in these topics. So we'll take a little bit of time next week to do that. And hopefully that will enrich our discussion. Thank you very much. Oh, and there's Christine with all of her cookies. Eat them for us, Christine. Thank you so much.
Gladly. Bye. Thanks for your good thoughts.
Happy birthday, Terry.
Thank you.
Oh, happy birthday, Terry.
It's a good discussion.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Great job. Great job.